We are live. What's going on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn Live? It's your man, Coach Rowe, coming to you from the first row. I'd like to welcome you to the first row. Today is Wednesday, and if it is Wednesday, you should know what that means. It's time for the Wednesday word. That's Wednesday word. Jumping straight into it, tonight's topic is rough transitions. As always, I'd like to share what I mean by my topic. So, what do I mean by rough transitions? What I mean by rough transitions is actually a couple of different things. Number one, sometimes in life things can be going as smooth as possible, and then we hit these pivotal moments in our life in which the transition becomes really rough to adjust to. So, like if you imagine a smooth road, you're driving on it, and then all of a sudden you're off road, it becomes really roughy and hard to traverse that road. But the other part of that is what I mean in rough transitions is every single time that we transition in our lives, we actually come to this place where that transition causes ripples to take place. And so, how our transitions, as our transitions take place, also, I'm sorry, how our transitions take place, those changes cause ripples that change not only ourselves but also change the world. So tonight I have three topics that I want to share with you, topics or tools for the first row that I would like to share with you when it comes to rough transitions. Let's go ahead and jump into it. Tool number one when it comes to rough transitions is change can be a lonely experience. So when we're in transitory, I think might be the word, I'm not 100%, but when we're in a state of transition, we'll call it, um, typically we are moving from a place of comfort. Going back to that smooth road, it's really comfortable to drive on the smooth road, to a space of discomfort. And it's not that it has to be bad or good, it's just that it's different and that it's a new experience. And so sometimes the roughness of a transition can create space between that comfort zone, which is surrounded by people, activities, maybe finances, just normal habits that we've grown accustomed to. Um, it transitions from that to a space where it's a lot of unknown that's going on. And in that transition, what can typically happen is we leave people behind. We might leave what we call the day ones. You might leave some of the people that you've known for a really long time behind because you're transitioning out of a state that you were in. And think about it like this: when you are in kindergarten, you graduate from kindergarten into the first grade. Well, there are some students that may struggle with the transition from kindergarten to first grade, and they'll be actually kept back in kindergarten for a second year so that they can get up to speed and be ready to go when they're in first grade. Well, in that separation, in that transition moment, what happens is you might move on and now you're in first grade and that person is still back in kindergarten. Well, the first graders don't really interact with the kindergartners. And it's not that the kindergartners are bad people or horrible people and people that don't want to interact with them. It's simply a matter of the fact that if I have moved on from kindergarten and I'm going to school for first grade, then I show up and I go to the first grade class. That's how change is. And that's unfortunately, I don't want to call it unfortunately because sometimes it's very fortunate. That is a symptom or an outcome of being in transition, is that you sometimes separate from those things that you're familiar with. And so why our change can be a lonely experience is because our change requires one critical thing: it requires change. Change requires change. um, and sometimes when we make changes in our own life, that transition becomes rough because of the fact that people are accustomed to who we were and not necessarily ready to accept who we are attempting to become or who we are in the process of becoming, or who we are striving to become. And so that can put people off and say, oh man, you've changed, and not want to be around you. Oh, I mean, you've changed and not want to be around you. That's one aspect that can create that loneliness. But the other aspect, which I think is sometimes a much more healthier aspect, is that as we change, as we evolve, as we mature, as we grow, we're able to look at our lives objectively and truly decide the things that we want in our lives and the things that we don't want in our lives. So I think about, like, for myself, when I changed the state that I lived in California for 36 years. And then I said, hey, I'm moving to Utah. And then I was living in Utah. When I initially moved, that change was a very lonely experience because I packed up my car and drove to Utah. I didn't know anybody out here. And then I knew my coworkers, but I really didn't know them. So I really was out here by myself. But in that change, what also took place was a lot of the relationships that were relationships of convenience because I was geographically located in California, a lot of those relationships begin to fizzle out. It was like only a few people actually came to Utah to visit me. Whereas when I lived in California, there were things I could do all the time. People wanted to connect with me all the time. Hey, let's meet for lunch. Hey, let's meet for drinks. Let's go out dancing. All those things were available when I was in California. But when I moved to Utah and I had this transition, at first it was a rough transition for me because I was used to being surrounded by people. But here's the benefit of a lonely experience that change can sometimes give us, is it gives us this solitude, this silence in which we're truly able to reflect on the things that are important to us in our lives and important to bring or create in the next transition that we're going into. And so for me, a lot of things begin to change, and I begin to hold people a lot more accountable for my time. Now, I'm always holding myself accountable for my time. Like, hey, this is what I got to do. This is what I got to get done. I'm going to get it done. However, I was able to hold people accountable to my time. Like, hey, if we schedule something and you don't show up, then that's kind of on you. That's not on me. And if we schedule something and you show up late, that doesn't extend the amount of time that you have access to me, because when I was in California at that point, everything was kind of on a schedule and I only have so many 24-hour periods, and some of that 24-hour periods has to be allocated to sleep. So that's tool number one, really thinking about how when we're in rough transitions, sometimes they feel rough, even when they're good transitions for us. They feel rough because when we are transitioning, change can create a lonely experience for us. But the one thing I will say, and the last thing I'll say about this tool, is almost like a caterpillar. When a caterpillar is a caterpillar, it crawls on plants or crawls on stems, eats leaves, whatever caterpillars do in their spare time, right? But once it goes into the cocoon and becomes out either a moth or a butterfly, it doesn't matter, because both of these insects can fly. Once it becomes a flying insect, all of a sudden, the caterpillars that the caterpillar may have used to hang out with, it can't really hang out with them on the same level. Why? Because caterpillars can't go where butterflies and moths can go. They can't fly. And so because they can't fly, sometimes they do have to be left behind. And again, this is sometimes in good situations, but also sometimes in bad situations. And we'll get a little more into the bad situations later. But I really wanted to bring that point home. Is the good news is that even when we are making these types of transitions and we are in the loneliness of the experience, typically on the other side of that transition, typically when you come out of the rough, you actually have new relationships that you can interact with. Butterflies may not be able to interact with caterpillars, but they can interact with other butterflies, because butterflies can go where butterflies go. So that's tool number one. Tool number two, when it comes to rough transition, is we don't always get change right the first time. Man, rough transitions can make you truly want to like give up. They kind of test your grit. Like, are you really about that change life, or did it just sound good when you were looking at it and now you found out you don't really want to do this change? But we don't necessarily get our changes right on the first time, and that can sometimes be a portion or a part of the rough transition that we are experiencing. That can be a portion of the frustration that we experience when it's like, okay, I'm going to make this change. And then on the other side, it's going to be really great. So I got to go through this little rough patch, but then on the other side, it's going to be really great. And then you go through this rough patch and you get on the other side and you're like, oh shoot, that wasn't the right change. I did it wrong. So then we have a choice to make. Do we go back across the rough patch to get to back where we were at, to start again and go back through the rough patch to get to a different change? Or do we stay there because now we've committed and we don't want to be embarrassed? I'm going to let you decide which one you want to do, but I would tell you, I'd rather be embarrassed going back to make the proper change than to stick with the change that I made out of some egotistically driven motive to save face. I think about it like even with my computer or even with my gaming systems, there's constantly software updates that have to take place, and especially when you're doing a software update like an operating system update on your laptop, that operating system update can take like 4 hours to update, 5 hours to update on your laptop. And so you're going through and you're waiting and it's loading and it's at 20% and it's at 40% and it's at 50%. And then you get to like 98, 99%. And then your battery dies on your laptop and it crashes and you have to start all over. Or you get an error. Hey, there's been an error in this software update. You're going to have to uninstall it and reinstall it. Sometimes we have to roll back to where we were at when we started. And it's not that it's a fun journey. It's not that it's a likable journey. Again, these are rough transitions. But we roll back to that point so that we can truly install what we need installed in the transition point, in the pivot, so that we can get to the space that we want to get on the other side. And not only get to it, because I don't think that the objective of transition is to arrive at the beginning of the destination. I think the objective of our transitions is to truly arrive and then travel through the actual destination that we are trying to transition to. The other thing is sometimes the reason why we don't always get change right the first time is because we sometimes change by accident. We sometimes change unintentionally or negligently. We sometimes change negligently, where we make choices, we make decisions that transition us to a space that we really didn't want to transition to. I think about right now, I have to like monitor my blood pressure. I'm not like on like blood pressure medicine or anything, but I'm monitoring my blood pressure to make sure that I'm bringing my blood pressure down. And I think about how did my blood pressure get high? And so, there's common causes, stress, diet, and all those different things. And so I'm like, okay, well, am I under a lot of stress? I mean, there's times where I'm under a lot of stress, but I don't think stress is driving my blood pressure. So I start thinking about my diet. Well, what am I eating? Oh, one of my favorite snacks, popcorn. You know what I like to put on my popcorn? Salt and butters and things that are going to drive my blood pressure through the roof. So then I start asking myself questions like, well, when do I eat popcorn? Well, I eat popcorn as an everyday snack. Or when I'm stressed, I can eat a significant amount of popcorn. So now I start asking myself questions, because I'm not always going to get this transition right. Start asking myself questions. Well, is it my stress that is driving my blood pressure up? Or is it what I eat when I'm stressed that's driving my blood pressure up? So that I can, in hopes, change that habit and transition to a new habit. And a new habit, hopefully a healthier habit, but a new habit nonetheless. Transition to a new, healthier habit and get to a space where I'm not eating the wrong foods when I'm stressed. Maybe when I'm stressed, I go and I work out, and I actually do that as well. Like I'll go and I'll actually just work out just to burn the stress energy off. And that is actually a healthier habit. So if I can drive myself to try to eat healthy and drive myself when I'm stressed to work out rather than eat and consume overly salty, sodium-filled foods, then maybe I can actually change my blood pressure. But what if I do those things and neither one of those are the solution? This is where rough transitions typically drive us back. When we're trying to make good transitions, I should say, typically drive us back to old comfortable behaviors. They drive us back to our comfort zones. It's because it becomes so hard. Oh, I'm tired of trying to figure it out. Oh, I don't know what it is. I don't want to put any more energy to trying to figure it out. I'm just going to go back to what I was doing. I was just talking to somebody today, and we were talking about how easy it is when you're in a routine to work out, just to work out and to work out. Oh, you want to work out 5 days a week? Once you get in that routine, 5 days a week just becomes a part of the program. But also how easy it is to say, I don't want to work out today, one day, and then not work out for 1 week, and then not work out for 2 weeks, and not work out for 3 weeks, and fall right back into that comfort zone of not working out. We don't always get our changes right the first time, but what I would recommend doing is being willing to evaluate if a change doesn't work out the first time. we call it in the analytics world, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is it worth putting in the work again to try to get the result that you're trying to transition to? And if it is, then go ahead and make that transition. If it's not, eventually you're going to have to transition one way or another to something new, because staying in the same place, humans can't just particularly do that. You're either growing or you're shrinking, in my opinion. And honestly, if you're not working out, you're either growing or shrinking. You're either growing fat or you're losing muscle, but growing or shrinking either way. But it's really about sitting with yourself and deciding if that juice is worth the squeeze. If I'm really going to be invested in being a person of growth, a person of who pushes themselves, who is willing to traverse back and forth sometimes across those rough transitions, if I'm going to be that person, I have to really find out how to make that work meaningful for myself. And sometimes here's a bonus to this about not getting change right the first time, is that because we get it wrong sometimes, going back over it, going back and forth, it actually develops us. I think about the formulas that I use when I'm working with Excel or working in my job with Excel. And sometimes I'll put a formula in and I think I've put everything in correctly. And it's like, I'll hit enter and I have an error. And it's like, what the heck? Why is this erroring? And it'll take me sometimes 3 to 5 minutes to figure out what the error is. And then sometimes it's just like something small. Sometimes it's like, oh, well, this particular column you're trying to match to has this issue compared to where you're matching from. Sometimes it's bigger, like, oh, well, you put too many parentheses in there. So unfortunately, we don't know what you're trying to tell us as a formula. There's an error. But either way, going back and forth across and researching and looking and diving into these formulas, what it does is it hones my ability to write formulas in a more efficient way and in a more correct way for the job that I need to do. And that's what accepting that sometimes we'll make a change that's not right the first time. Going back that's what that does. It gives us ability to look back into the changes that we've made and make a better decision the next time that we traverse it. And sometimes it actually does lessen the impact of the roughness of the transition. Sometimes if you've made a serious mistake, it can increase the intensity of the roughness of the transition. But oftentimes you can take lessons as you're traveling back and say, okay, next time I travel this road, I need to bring a jacket. Next time I travel this road, I need to bring a lunch. And you'll prepare yourself a lot better. So that's tool number 2. And then finally, in rough transitions, tool number 3 is don't be afraid to make waves. Look, transitions are sometimes like earthquakes. They have little ones that you can barely feel. It kind of disturbs your balance a little bit. And then there's big ones that can bring buildings to the ground. Don't be afraid to make waves. If there is one thing that I have learned about all of the transitions that I have gone through, no matter whether they were good or bad, on the other side of every single transition, there have been people who have liked me and people who have not. Even when I stay in a transition and choose not to transition, stay in a destination and choose not to transition, there have still been people who have liked me and people who have not. At the end of the day, we have to decide, regardless of whether people are going to like us or not, is the transition something that we want? Because the initial wave that any transition is going to make is the initial impact that any transition is going to make is with ourselves. The moment we decide to transition, we are moving ourselves again out of that comfort zone into the unknown, into the challenge zone. I think about with my Fitbit watch, there's these activity minutes that you can have, and you can have some that are just an elevated heart rate and you do it for so many minutes, but then there's cardio and then there's peak heart rate. And I try to push myself every single workout to at least engage at one point in the workout at a peak heart rate of 167. Like that's the goal of what I'm trying to hit. And so that impact initially is an impact for me. It initially hits me like, wow, bam, 167 heart rate. You can feel that if you're not an active person. You probably could feel that if you are an active person. But then what happens is my energy is better. My attitude is better. My performance is better. And so now the impact that initially hits me begins to ripple out into the other things in my life that I'm doing. it begins to ripple out into my work. It begins to ripple out into my relationships. It begins to ripple out into the energy that I have to pour into people intentionally. It begins to ripple out into First Row, and the content that I produce here. All that begins to ripple out and make impacts. And the reality for me, and I think for a lot of us, is that sometimes we don't want to be that disturbance. We don't want to be that disruptor in the world that is our little world, like our little community that we have. But the reality is we should not be required to remain stagnant to appease the fears that others may have about their own personal changes. Me changing as an individual, you changing as an individual, is all about you. And man, that sounds selfish saying it out loud, but that's the reality. Is it's all about you. It's all about transforming, because transition typically leads to transformation, transforming who you are today into a better version tomorrow, who you are tomorrow into a better version the day after that. That's what transition is about. So realize that at the end of the day, sometimes it is going to be rough. Sometimes the seas are going to be choppy. Sometimes it's going to be lonely. Sometimes you're going to get it wrong. But at the end of the day, don't be afraid to make those waves and transition to the life, not just the lifestyle, but the life that you want to live, so that you can leave behind the legacy that you want to live. So that's tool number 3. Really quick. Hey, what's going on, Karina? And tell Giovanni I said hi. So that's tool number 3 for tonight's Wednesday Word. Really quick, I want to go over the tools with you one more time when it comes to rough transition. The very first tool is change can be a lonely experience. Again, not everyone is meant to follow us through our transitions, and that is natural. That is okay. And realize that sometimes we do need to shed those relationships so that we can transition to where we need to be. Tool number 2 is we don't always get change right the first time. You may get the first attempt completely wrong, honestly, and that's okay. But you didn't have to make that decision. Is the juice worth the squeeze to go back, start over, and try again? Don't allow your ego to get in the way of making that decision. Simply make the best decision for you so that you can make the best transition possible. And then tool number 3 is don't be afraid to make waves. Again, you're not transitioning to make others happy. You may or may not make them happy. But in the reality is you don't add any additional value to their happiness because you're changing. You add additional quality to your life and your impact by transitioning and by enduring rough transitions. That's what you're adding to your life. And that will make waves in your life that then creates ripples that echo throughout the lives of others. But those are the 3 tools that I have for you guys tonight. Really quick, as far as with every Wednesday Word, I do like to share a personal story, something that got me thinking about this particular topic. And with this one, I had a couple of different stories that came up, but this one I kind of stuck with because it's something that I struggle with continually, like probably will continue to struggle with it year over year over year. It's the rough transition that I had transitioning into First Row. I don't even know. I can't remember how long I've been doing First Row content now. It's been a while, though, some years to say the least, that I've been doing First Row content. But when I first got into First Row content, there was a lot of imposter syndrome that I felt in regards to wanting to be inspirational, developing inspirational content, sharing stories where I'm getting it right, sharing stories where I'm getting it wrong. There was a lot of conflict that I had with that. And so it was a really rough transition for me. Though naturally, I'm naturally a speaker, it was a rough transition to speak in this inspirational space for me. It may not appear to on video because I do a lot of pre-work before I get into a show to present. But there was a lot of agony in my thought processes early in the First Row experience. And what I noticed was, as I started creating First Row content and as I started sharing my story and sharing experiences with people, I was actually losing some friendships. Like, Ro, how long are you going to be doing that inspirational thing? And I was like, yo, what do you mean? How long are we going to be doing this inspirational thing? I mean, I've even had, I mean, if you've read my book, I've even had a person tell me to my face, I don't even see you as that inspirational. Um, and these are the people that are no longer a part of my journey, because in this transition, it was already rough enough trying to be inspiring and inspirational. But in this transition, eventually I got to the place where I have moved on from those relationships. Number one, because they were anchors to an identity that I was trying to move away from. Not that I was a horrible person before I started doing inspirational content, but I wasn't the person that I wanted to be, and I wasn't the person that I am today. And I knew I wanted to be more like the person I am today than I was the person back in the day. And so I moved away from those relationships. And in many ways, it was almost like a working experiment where I was getting some things right, getting some things wrong, getting some things right, getting some things wrong. I play with this inspirational content. Wednesday words, when I first started, were like 4 minutes, 5 minutes long. Now they're like 25 to 30 minutes long. But I would play with things and tweak them and adjust them. And I remember when I moved to Utah, when I first met my wife when we were dating, I remember her saying, "Hey, why don't you put these first? Why don't you put like some key tools that you could share with the audience on these topics?" And I was like, "All right, I'm going to try it out." And the first ones were like really hard for me to come up with and really hard to articulate to the audience. And so I was getting it wrong the first time. But the reason I was getting it wrong is because I wasn't writing notes for myself that allowed me to articulate and expand upon the actual tools. So I had to go back to the drawing board of, okay, do I really want to put these tools? Do I want to put tools for the first row, or do I want to just kind of go on a 5 minute rant and call it a day? But I was like, these tools, they do have value, and I have to figure this out. So I go back to my tools and I started writing them, and I created a template that I still use today to write the tool and then write out some things that come to my mind or come to my heart when I think about the tool and how I've used the tool and how other people can use the tool. And then after I did that, there's still the imposter syndrome that comes up. That is a fear of mine. Like, people don't want to hear what you have to say. And I don't know why I have this inner fear of like people not wanting to hear what I have to say. But I always have to take myself back to why I made the transition. I didn't make the transition on first row for people to hear what I had to say or to have some kind of fame or some type of recognition for the things that I do. What I do for the first row is really a video blog or journal that I am leaving behind for generations to come, whether it's people in my family, my immediate family, my sons, my grandchildren, their grandchildren, my great grandchildren, whatever it may be. It's a place that one day when I'm no longer here and it's ashes to ashes, dust to dust for me, um, people who want to know about me or people who are struggling with things in their life will have a place that I have left behind. It's almost like a video time capsule that I'm leaving behind. Um, and that is the wave that, after it impacts me, of all the stuff I learned from creating the content, that is the wave that I see, or the ripples that I see, that will go out long after, I'm sorry, I have turned back to dust. So that is what really got me thinking about this particular topic. Yes, cousin Brian, in the backyard, the early days, I used to be in the backyard 7:30 in the morning before I go to work. But that is what really drove me to talk about this topic, that sometimes our transitions that we're making, they can be rough. Sometimes they can be downright brutal. But if we can let go of our egos and really focus on where we are trying to go in life, that transition, or the roughness of that transition, the turbulence of that transition, will be worth getting to the other side. And even if we get it wrong when we get to the other side, it'll be worth taking the journey back to try again to get to the right mountaintop on that time, on the next journey. So that's what I have for you guys tonight when it comes to rough transitions. As always, I appreciate you guys tuning in live. I appreciate you guys engaging in the chat. The next time that you will be able to see anything, not on the first row, but it will be on The Grind to Find, will be with Carolyn Michelle, the Grind to Find podcast. That will be this Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That is on any place that you can find podcasts. It is the Grind to Find podcast. If you want more information, you can go to thegrinddefined.com and get more information on that. And then the next time you'll see us live on the first row will be Tuesday for another edition of Carolyn Michelle and Billy Rowe Live. That is at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We had a great conversation last night. So if you were not able to catch that, I would recommend going back and catching last night's episode because it was phenomenal. And then last but not least, the Wednesday Word next week. You'll be able to catch us next week on the Wednesday Word at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for another live edition of the Wednesday Word. As always, you can find me on any social media, or almost all social media, at firstrow.com. You can find my co-host, Carolyn Michelle, on all social media at thegrinddefined.com. And then if you have not done so already, please head over to firstrow.com. Get your copy of the book and the journal of Fire Your Job, Hire Your Passion. Wonderful, wonderful book. And I'm not saying that because I wrote it. I'm saying it because that is what people keep sending me, is that it's a wonderful book and it's being applied in their lives. It's not just wonderful, like, oh, my friend wrote a book. It's like, hey, today at work, I was dealing with this. And I also read this chapter. And because I read this chapter, I was able to sync these two things up and really maneuver through what that opportunity was versus just complaining about it. That's what I mean when I say it's a really good book. And I think that if you get the book and you put the time in, you put the work in, though the transition may be rough, the outcome will be wonderful. So that's what I have for you guys tonight. Again, I thank you guys for tuning in live. I thank you guys for rocking with me in the live chat. If you guys are watching via the replay, feel free to leave a comment. Feel free to like. Feel free to subscribe. Feel free to do all the things that you want to do. I'm happy to interact with you in the comment section up until the first week. And then after that, we move on to the next content on the first row. But until the next time, thank you guys for tuning in. If you like this video, share it. If you share it, like it. I'm happy to engage in live or in the comments for the first 7 days after the content is produced. Until the next time, one love, peace, and God bless. Thanks for sitting on the first row.